Okay, in this part of evolution, we're going to be focusing on the evidence, the information that science uses, evolutionary science, to back up claims of evolutionary processes, um, how things evolve, species evolution, that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Okay, remember we've looked at the term already. We know what evolution means. It's a genetic change in a species or a population of species over time. And it's a gradual change. It's not something that happens quickly. Uh, some of the evidence that we have to support that there has been change in species in a particular population of species is fossil record. Okay, paleontologists who study fossils, they look at these remains of these dead organisms or extinct organisms to help determine relationships, structural relationships, those types of things. Types of fossils that you have. You have trace fossils. Examples would be like footprints that are left behind or imprints of an organism. Say, for example, this particular picture here, that would be an imprint of an organism. Uh, the outer shell of an organism, so that would be a type of trace fossil. Burrows, if organisms leave burrows like worms or other structures that would burrow into the dirt. And then, like I mentioned, footprints. Um, Bones, teeth, okay, those are all examples. Now, when you're looking at a fossil, you're not necessarily looking at the actual, say for example, we found bones of a dinosaur, okay? You're not actually seeing the bones that were inside that dinosaur. What a fossil is, well, here's how it works. When an animal dies, okay, an organism dies, it gets buried. Um, it has to be buried in a type of soil or material that would allow water to flow, okay, to seep through. So it couldn't be really clay. It would have to allow some type of water flow. And what's going to happen is as water flows, this animal maybe gets buried in a swamp, or buried due to a volcanic eruption, buried due to an earthquake, something like that. So they die. The remains get buried before it decomposes. Then once it gets buried, and pressure from the surface above it, from the soil above it, keeps it intact, there will be water that'll flow through and allow for the decay process to happen. But at this point, the soil around it, the land around it, has already taken on its shape. So as decomposition occurs, it's been buried, and as decomposition occurs, the the um, the flesh, the muscle, the organs, all of that stuff gets decomposed. Well, the last thing to be decomposed is the bones. And so what's going to happen are the bones are going to last a lot longer. So decomposition of the bones is going to take a lot longer. So the soil is going to harden. Um, Minerals are going to be formed because of the water that's flowing through it. So the bones, as they decay, or as they are decomposed, they're being replaced by mineral deposits, minerals that are carried by water that I've mentioned. So eventually, once the bones disappear through decomposition, there is a mineral structure, a solid mineral structure that's left over as a result, and that is the fossil. So it's not the bones that you see when you dig up a dinosaur bone, for example. You're seeing a fossil which is made up of minerals, say calcium, limestone, whatever type of mineral that's found in that area. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing a structure that is a replica, an imprint, okay, a mold, if you will, um, of that particular organism. So dinosaur bones would be an example of mold fossils. Okay, as I mentioned, most fossils are going to be found in soils or rocks that allow water flow. Sedimentary rock is a very common type of rock that is going to contain fossils. because sediments bury the organisms through erosion and weathering, and then that sedimentary rock is going to form. They usually form in layers as well. The bottom of the layers of sedimentary rock, or the fossils that are at the bottom, are going to be the oldest. Usually the bottom layer is also the oldest layer as well. And then the farther up you move, say you were looking at the side of a cliff and you saw a strata. This is called a strata or strata, the side of a cliff that exposes these different layers. And if you were to dig in these different layers, then you would find, say, a fossil in this bottom layer compared to the fossil in the top layer. You would know that the layers further down would hold the older fossils, and the layers closer to the top of the surface of a strata of a cliff would be the newer fossils. Now, the fossil record does have a lot of information of evidence of past organisms. We know dinosaurs existed because we found their fossils. Do we know the exact structure of every dinosaur? No, because we're always finding new evidence. Okay, at one point we thought Tyrannosaurus rex for a long time had 3 fingers on his hand. Here recently we found, due to discoveries and more technology and more evidence, that he didn't have 3 fingers, he only had 2. The third was a part of something else that went with the fossil, or went with the structure of the dinosaur. So the fossil record is incomplete. New evidence that gives us new insights to what these organisms look like. Can you find DNA in a fossil? No, because there's no living material left in that fossil because of decomposition. Okay. Also, not every animal that dies forms a fossil. Most animals that die, they die in places where their bodies are eaten by other animals, or they die on the surface, on a hard surface, and decomposition occurs through bacteria and algae or those types of things, and it gets it gets broken down quicker than it can form a fossil. There has to be the right situations for these animals that die and they get buried through, like I said, in watery type environments, swamps, maybe the ocean, catastrophic events like earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, those types of things, where they could be buried, and they're buried in the right types of soils, usually sedimentary soils. Then they can form fossils. Most of the time, however, these animals that die don't. So we have a lot of gaps in the fossil record because of this. Now, the idea of, remember, we started looking at Darwin, and we know that Darwin originally believed, like the Church of England believed, that no animal changes, that God created every organism exactly how they are, and they don't change. That was the original belief. After Darwin did a lot of his observations, that's where some of this came to light, that, you know what, life on Earth does have the ability to change. And we know that it does because look at the last unit we talked about. We talked about how each trait that we have, okay, each trait that we have, whether it be our eye color or our hair color or our blood type, every trait that we have has 2 versions of it, okay? Whichever version shows up is the one that we see, but we carry 2 versions. Now, life has the ability to change. Organisms in a population have the ability to change. If, say, for example, you talk about the human population, and for some reason our sun, our star for our solar system, started to get hotter quicker than it's supposed to. It started to get hotter, it burned brighter, and it caused our skin to burn more quickly. Okay, it caused an increase of skin cancer to happen very, very quickly within a few years of exposure, instead of you could go your whole lifetime without being overexposed now. But say that were to happen, to where just after a few years you could develop skin cancer, or every time you went out after about 5 minutes you would get a sunburn. Well, the people in our population, in the human population, that had the ability, that had a gene variation, an allele from a parent that was passed down through some lineage that allowed them to not burn, or not burn as easily, so they could stay outside longer without their skin burning. um, or that had a particular gene that allowed their bodies to help reduce the chances of cell mutations due to overexposure to sun radiation, which decreased cancer to form. These little gene variations, okay, would aid those particular people. And then the people that didn't have this, they would burn quicker, they would burn more quickly, they would develop cancers more quickly, they could die out more quickly. And so our human population would change, would shift, would adapt, and the people that had the genes, whether it be what it shows up in their phenotype or the traits that they carried inside that maybe was a part of their genotype, those particular people within the human population would be able to adapt more easily and survive, and the people that couldn't wouldn't. And so that's how that's just one example of how changes in an organism can occur. So we know that that happens, okay? We know that because of this, we can kind of map using the fossil record of these organisms that have changed over time. All right, another type of evidence for the fossil record, or for not the fossil record, but for evidence of evolution, is this idea of amino acid sequencing. Remember, our DNA and the DNA of every living organism on the planet, whether it be plant or animal, use the same 4 nucleotides that are formed from the amino acids, okay? And so because of this, we can look at the sequences of these amino acids to see how closely related different species of organisms are. So for example, even though we have cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine that make up our DNA, and an oak tree has cytosine, adenine, guanine, and thymine that makes up its DNA, the sequence of those amino acids are not that close. So the sequence of ours compared to the DNA sequences of an oak tree are very different. There's a really big difference in the arrangement. So we're not that closely related to an oak tree. And obviously you can tell by looking at us versus a plant that's true. However, there are certain animals, whether it be humans and a chicken, or a chicken and an ostrich, or a dog and a hyena, or a lion and a cat. Okay, these animals, you can tell by looking at their amino acid sequences of their DNA that they're really closely related, because those sequences are almost identical. There's just a few differences. Okay, so we can actually look at this sequencing to help add evidence to the idea that that organisms do adapt. Now, that doesn't mean that a tabby cat was once a lion and it evolved into a tabby cat. That's not what this means. It means that we have species that are closer related, and maybe they're distant cousins. Okay, but that doesn't mean that a tabby cat was a lion. But we can definitely see that there are relationships due to the DNA. Okay, if you want to look at some of these relationships as far as how closely related these DNA sequences are, let's compare a human's DNA sequence to that of some different animals. Okay, our DNA sequence compared to a frog's DNA sequence, there's about 67 different differences, or the number of differences, if you will. And we're talking about in our hemoglobin, the stuff that makes up our blood. Okay, 27 differences between us and a mouse, as far as that goes. 8 differences between us, okay, and certain types of monkeys. This is a lamprey, so 125 differences. It's an ocean-going animal. 45 between us and differences between us and a chicken, and then only 1 difference in the sequence of our DNA in our hemoglobin versus a gorilla. So you can definitely see the commonalities between the different animals and how closely related our DNA sequences are.